O primeiro tema que a gente vai falar agora é sobre a evolução da escola. E para isso eu vou chamar um professor que trabalha há 22 anos na rede pública de ensino nos Estados Unidos. Ele é autor de vários artigos, vários textos, vários podcasts, vídeos sobre educação e sobre a transformação da educação. Ele é autor de 6 livros, incluindo o livro Why School? Por que Escola? É o pai da tese do Tucker e pensa a educação em uma era de abundância de informação. É o Will Richardson.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me, for giving me an opportunity to get out of the most confusing country in the world right now, the United States. I have no idea what's happening in the United States right now. It is great to be here with you at such a beautiful place. I'm glad I'm in a room with no windows so that you're not looking out at the trees and the jungle and the animals. And it's just a real opportunity and a real honor for me to get 30 minutes to talk to you a little bit about how the world is changing in terms of education, and to challenge you to think a little bit differently around what schools could be at this most very interesting moment for learning. I think that there's never been a more amazing time to be a learner than today. But I also think that this is a very challenging time for schools. And I want to try to make that case this morning very quickly, and to give you some things to think about as you go through the rest of the conference. So I do think this is a pivotal moment. I think that education and learning are moving in two different directions. I think one direction is basically filled with lots of opportunities in terms of the things that we can do with technology and without technology as well in classrooms, where kids can use technologies in ways that I think for most of us we wouldn't even have imagined it even 5 or 10 years ago. But I think that the ways that kids are learning today poses real challenges for us as schools and for us as educators. I have 2 children. One is 18 and one is 20. And as they were going through school, one of the things I noticed more than anything else is that the way they learned outside of school looked increasingly different from the way they were learning inside of school. And if this is the picture that we think of in terms of classrooms, then I think we're in for a real awakening, because this can't sustain. This type of classroom cannot prepare kids for the types of worlds that they're going to engage in when they grow up and when they leave us. So I think that this is an interesting cartoon in that for many of us in education, I think we are more comfortable with telling the story that we've told forever, even though that there are real problems with that story about education. There are real challenges around it. And I think in many cases we don't want to hear those and we don't want to accept those, but this morning I'm going to try to push some of those. I'm going to try to articulate some of those as we go through this. Now, I want to do one thing. This may be chaotic. I don't think I've ever done it with a group this size, but I think this is important. I'm going to give you, not 1 minute, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to turn to someone next to you, 3, 4, 5 people, and I just want you to do one thing for me. In 30 seconds, I want you to try and do this. Define learning. Go. Here's my point. All of us should agree on what that word means. All of us in education should share an understanding of what that word means. And yet I wonder if I went into your schools and I picked 20 people at random and I asked them to define that word, I wonder how many different definitions I would get. In many cases, in many places that I go, I get 20 different definitions. And I wonder, how can we do our work as educators in schools if we don't share a definition of that word? I don't think that transformation, I don't think that reimagination or any of it is possible if we don't share an understanding of what learning is. And so the first challenge that we have is that we don't, in most cases, share a definition for that word. We don't have a common understanding of what learning is, and that's a problem. That's a really big problem. Because in my kids' case, that meant that they would go to their first class and they would have to figure out what learning meant. Then they would go to their second class, they would have to figure it out all over again. Then they go to their third class again, and so on and so on. And I see a lot of people going like this because they understand that it's inconsistent. It's not something that is the same throughout, and we know this. Now, we have an addiction to putting the word in front of learning. So we flip learning, we binge learn, we personalize learning. My favorite now is high-quality project-based learning. It's like we can't add enough words in front of the word learning in order to make sense of it. But I wonder if we just said, no more adjectives, just learning. I wonder if that would change the conversation. And I think that would be a good exercise. I think that would be an interesting thing to do, actually. So one of my favorite authors is a man by the name of Seymour Saracen. And he wrote a book, and it was titled, "And What Do You Mean by Learning?" And I think this is important enough that I tried to use Google Translate to put this into Portuguese. I don't know if it worked or not. I think they had to change my slide, actually, to make it correct. But this is the most important question of our work. And I want to share with you the definition that Saracen had on what learning is. He said, and I'll put up the Portuguese slide, productive learning is learning which engenders wanting to learn more. Absent wanting to learn more, the process is unproductive. And I think that probably resonates for most people in this room. I don't think there's anyone in this room who's an expert at something they find boring as all get out. I think the things that you all have learned most powerfully and deeply in your lives are the things you've wanted to learn more about, right? Those are the things that you have learned. The things that you don't want to learn more about, you forget them. They don't stick. So the truth is that most contexts in schools are unproductive for kids. They don't leave school saying, I can't wait to learn more. They usually leave school saying, thank goodness that's over. And that's not true of every child, but in general, that is our challenge because the world now is basically different in terms of allowing us to learn more about whatever we want to learn more about. But when was the last time you learned something that you didn't need or didn't want to learn? I can't think of a time when I learned something that I didn't need or didn't want to learn. Yet when I talk to my children, when they come home from school, what'd you learn in school today? They don't really want to learn that stuff. So we think that if you are educated, that means you have learned. I don't think that's true. I think your education comes from what you learn, what you want to learn, what you remember, and what you want to learn more about. That is what equals your education. Now, I can prove this. Well, let me give you a quote. I was in Sydney, Australia last month, and a woman came up to me and she said, my son just about every day when he goes to school says, well, here I go on my 6-hour interruption of my learning. And basically what he was saying was, I learn all sorts of stuff that I want to learn, that I need to learn, that I want to learn more about, but now I go to school and I learn things that I don't really care about that much. So let me tell you a quick story. One of the most expensive and one of the most prestigious independent schools in America is Lawrenceville Prep. It's about 3 miles from Princeton University, and parents spend $60,000 a year to send their kids to Lawrenceville Prep so that they can get an education that sends them to Princeton basically. So the people at Lawrenceville Prep decided to do an experiment. They said, what if we take this one classroom of kids who are juniors, who are in year 11, and when they come back as year 12 kids, when school starts the next year, let's give them the same test that we gave them 3 months ago without telling them we're going to do it, and let's see how they do. So in June, when the year ended, they took the test, and on average, they got an 87. 87, pretty good. 3 months later, in September, when they came back and took the same test, the average was a 58. A 58. They didn't learn it. They remembered it for the test. And as soon as the test was over, they let it go. And I wonder how many of us in this room would be brave enough to do the same experiment in our schools? How many of us would basically give kids the test that they took 3 months ago and see how they do? And then ask ourselves, what did they learn? I think that 58 is more reflective of what they learned than the 87. Now, my son would be in shock if he knew I was showing you his grades right now. And basically, this is the parent portal where we go to see the grades that our kids are getting. And I have to tell you, when I look at Tucker's grades, he did okay. He got A's, lots of A's, some B's, a couple C's. But I have no idea what he learned. I have no idea what he learned by looking at those grades. They mean nothing in terms of learning. In fact, I can tell you, they don't reflect what he learned in those courses very much at all. Because most of that stuff, he didn't want to learn more about. And so when the class was over, he kind of let it go, and then he moved to the next thing, and then the next thing. So this is an unpleasant truth, that many of our kids don't retain, they don't learn more, they don't want to learn more. And if I asked you this, if we had time to talk and if I could understand, I'd ask you, so what are the conditions that would make kids want to learn more in school? What kinds of things would have to be present for kids to learn more? And I've asked this question now, I'm not kidding, to 150,000 people in 15 different countries over the last 3 years. And every time I ask it, all of their responses are the same. And I know that you would say the same things too. If I asked you what needs to be there for kids to want to learn, you would say, well, they need to have passion. They need to have a real purpose. They need to have an audience. It needs to be their own decision about learning. It's not constrained by time. No one in the real world learns in 60-minute or 90-minute chunks. No one in the real world learns English or Portuguese and then history and then chemistry. And nobody learns like that. Those aren't great conditions, but it has to be a personal investment. It has to be safe. So you would say all of these things. I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it. This is not rocket science. This is an easy question. What is required for learning to happen? But now I want to show you a list of things that people have never said in 3 years, and you wouldn't say them either, when I asked them, what kinds of conditions are required for really deep and powerful learning to happen? This is what people never, ever, ever say when I ask them that question. Ever. They never say things like, well, let's sit them in rows. Let's break it out by 45-minute blocks. Let's put a lot of emphasis on grades. That's a good thing to do to motivate learning. Or let's make sure that kids have no choice at all in what they're going to learn, how they're going to learn it, how they're going to be assessed on it. No one ever says that when I ask the question, and you wouldn't either. So we have an interesting problem. Because in many ways in schools, we're not doing the things that we believe. We believe the things on the left, yet we do the things on the right. And that's a problem. Because by and large now, our kids are not waiting for us. They are learning on their own. They are going out and learning amazing things on their own. The contexts for learning have changed. I want to show you a couple of examples of kids, and you know kids like this. There are kids like this in your schools. There are kids like Nate, who's an 8-year-old podcaster, who if you go to iTunes right now and you look up the show about science, you'll see about 40 episodes that Nate has posted to iTunes. And they're great. And he has a real passion for science. In fact, he says, basically, I want people to listen to my show so they will love science too. And he has thousands of people who are subscribed to his podcast, 8 years old. Thousands of people from around the world who want to learn more about science, just like he does. It's productive learning. And we have lots of kids like this. Nates are everywhere. The kids in your schools are Nates in some form. We have kids who basically were born without a forearm, who are now making prosthetics for other kids who have that same handicap, using 3D printers. We have kids who are writing books about learning how to code and trying to get them published by real publishers, but can't, so they go on Kickstarter, which is a place where you can ask people for money to fund your project. And in this case, this girl, Sasha, asked for $5,000, and she got $17,000 to publish this book. And you can go on Amazon right now and buy this book. She's a published author at 15 years old. We have kids whose grandparents are suffering from Alzheimer's and can't remember their own children, can't remember the faces. So this girl created an app where if her grandmother shows the phone or points the phone at someone, it recognizes the face and the name shows up at the bottom. So her grandmother will always remember who the people are in her life. And finally, we have this particular young man in India who was so upset by all the attacks that were happening in his neighborhood that he decided to make a shoe, which if you were wearing it and you were attacked and you kicked your attacker, it would electrocute him. And what I love about this is the story that he tells. And he says, it was hard. It was really hard to do this. He said, I had to learn all sorts of programming. I had to learn all sorts of technology. But I learned it from people on social media. I learned it from people on LinkedIn. And he said, I faced electrocution twice. My friend got a nosebleed because of this work. And basically, I kept at it and I kept at it. And on the bottom there, he said, when I finally created a prototype, a shoe that worked, I felt like a superhero. Now, you can guess, none of these examples had anything to do with school. These are kids who had a passion, who wanted to learn more, who wanted to solve a real problem, who wanted to create something, and they did it on their own because today they can. They can. 10 years ago, not so much. But today, they can. What do you think tomorrow is going to be like? What do you think 10 years from now is going to be like? In terms of kids' ability to learn more, to do real work in the world, to be amazing, amazing learners. Learning is leaving the building. And this is a good thing. This is an amazing thing. This is a powerful moment. Because today, learners can learn just about anything they want, anytime they want, anywhere they are, with whomever they can find. Just about. And that is because you are now a part of the biggest educational shift ever. And I mean ever. We have moved from a system that used to say, if you want to learn history, you have to come to this classroom on this day, at this time, to be with these kids who are your age, probably from your neighborhood, to be with this teacher, to go through this curriculum at this pace, and be assessed in this way, because if you don't do that, you may not learn history. But the reality today is, everything that you teach is in a million places online. History is everywhere. Algebra is everywhere. The sum of human knowledge is in our pockets. There's almost nothing in a content sense that we can't learn on our own. And we now have 5 billion people from whom we can learn it, or with whom we can learn it. And that's amazing. And now we have millions of technologies and apps that allow us to learn more. And I just want to say, this is complex. This is not easy. It's not all wonderful. Some of this is not great. And that's why we need to make sure that our kids can separate the good from the bad, the valuable from the not so valuable, the people who will help them from the people who will harm them, and the information, and I speak now as someone from the United States, the information that is true and the information that is not true. And we have a real problem in the United States right now, separating or finding truth. And that's not a good place to be. So, welcome to it. This is your world. This is your kids' world. You may not like it. You may not live it. You may wish it would go away. It's not going away. In fact, I look at this and I say, that's an amazing thing. This is an amazing, amazing moment to be alive, especially if you're a learner. So, schools weren't created for this. And that's why reimagination or transformation is now something we have to think about. And basically, it is, in a lot of the work that we've been doing in Change School and Change Leaders Community, the two online places that we run, we work with schools from literally around the world on trying to figure out what reimagination looks like. And it is about really understanding 3 things. And they're not that hard, but they take some work. You have to go deeply into it. Number 1, how do children learn most powerfully and deeply? What do you believe? What do you believe about learning? What do you understand about learning? Number 2, how is the world changing? How can you do your work as educators if you don't understand how the big shifts are changing in the bigger world? And finally, the last piece of it is, what could schools be? And I'll tell you, again, over the last 10 years since I've been traveling around the world, I've seen schools that are absolutely amazing, where kids want to learn more. I saw a school last month where at recess, when the time was up, kids were banging on the window of the school door saying, "Let us in, let us in, let us in." I'd never seen that before. And the reason they wanted to come in was because they absolutely loved the stuff that they were doing in school. Because it was about real issues. It was about real problems. It was about things that mattered to them. It wasn't about just chemistry or just algebra or some subject that they were being kind of forced to learn. They cared about what it was that they were learning. So we need to realize, too, that, what it means to be educated today, probably not going to be education tomorrow. What it means to be literate certainly is changing. What it means to be skilled, what it means to be successful, all of those things are now changing. We can't live in education by outdated definitions of those words. So what does it look like? Well, really fast. It's about work that matters. It's about asking questions. It's about authentic audiences, real audiences for the work. It's about cultures of learning. But more than anything else, it's about creating the conditions in classrooms where kids and teachers, by the way, want to learn more. Where they leave every day going, I want to learn more. I'll give you just a couple of examples. The Peel School Board in Toronto, 150,000 kids. They start by saying, this is what we believe. And once they have articulated what they believe, then they say, and this is what it looks like. I know that's tough to read, but this is their document that says, we teach this way. This is the way our classrooms need to look. This is what learning needs to be. Another school outside of Atlanta, which I love. Basically, we prepare students. We are a school of inquiry, innovation, and impact. And we prepare all students to be college-ready, globally competitive, engaged citizen leaders. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but they do real-world projects. So this was a dog that was blind, And this person gave a challenge and says, can anyone create a toy that will allow my blind dog to play for 2 minutes? And the kids and teachers at that school took that on. And basically, they said, this would be really good for us adults to think about how we design classrooms, but also it would be a great opportunity for our children to fix a real problem, to do something that matters to them, that has an impact in the world somehow. And just really fast, I love these guys because their beliefs are basically that relationships are foundational, that curiosity and passion that drive learning, that learning demands interactive and flexible spaces, that empathy influences learning, and that learners apply knowledge to make an impact. And I just want to challenge you, if you have not articulated what you believe as a school community, why not? If you don't have a list like this, why not? Because everything that happens in this school is filtered through those beliefs. Everything. They start with questions. They fail up. They share the well. They assume the best, and they have fun. Those are their norms for learning in that school. We're on a park outside of Melbourne, Australia. Just a quick example. Kids came in one day, and they said to the teacher, "What's Bitcoin?" And the teacher said, "Well, let's find out." So they found out. And then the kids said, "Can we make our own cryptocurrency?" And basically now, they're the only school in the world that's being run on blockchain because the kids had a question. And the teacher said, "Yes, let's pursue it because it's your question, because it matters to you." So it's changing. The World Economic Forum says, let kids play. You know, in Finland, kids get 2 hours every day to play. 2 hours. Because the Finns believe that deep learning comes from play. That kids are healthier. They're more prepared to learn when they do that. And they learn a lot simply through play. In New Zealand, national standards are being pulled back because there's too many, because it's overwhelming. Same thing is happening in British Columbia and Canada, where they've cut back half of the curriculum. And they've said to teachers, make it interesting. Do things that kids want. Give them more agency. Lots of schools in the States are getting rid of grades. And I'll show you a slide here in a minute about another effort to do that. In Kansas, one of our smallest states, they came out last year and they said, we need to totally redesign our education system, totally. And the first thing they're doing is getting rid of age groupings. There is going to be no more first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade. They're getting rid of it because it doesn't make sense at the end of the day when mixing learners is more effective. In Colorado, there's a big move to apprenticeships, kids learning on the job, which, by the way, there's not a person in the room that didn't learn 95% of what you know about teaching while you were teaching. You didn't learn it in school. You learned it actually teaching, actually leading. That's how we learn, by doing. And we must rethink education employing innovative and collaborative solutions. And then finally, this is a really interesting thing in the States right now. This is mastery.org, which is about 150 very prestigious independent schools who are saying, in 5 years, we are going to send college transcripts for applications with no numbers, no grades at all. Because basically, it's a broken instrument that no longer serves students, teachers, or the world outside our school walls. And as the head of this effort said, there is zero research in the world that supports grades. Never has been, other than a terrible idea that has been corrupted. It's just fine. So as I bring this to a close, to reimagine schools, I think you have to ask some more fundamental questions. You have to ask, what is learning? And you have to come to some coherence around that word in your school community, where parents and students and teachers and leaders and everyone shares that. They understand what it means. So they're all moving together in terms of making that happen. What are the greatest potentials of children today? Today, not 100 years ago, not 50 years ago, but what can kids do today? And are we really fulfilling those potentials? And what are our deepest commitments to kids? that we want them to be happy, that we want them to be healthy, that we want them to enjoy life, to enjoy learning, and are we keeping those commitments to kids? And basically, what is the value of school today? In a world where everything you teach is online, where basically there are great teachers that we can connect to in lots of different places in the world, what value is there for bringing kids and teachers together? And by the way, I think there is a great value in that. I think that there is lots of value in that. But it's a different value from what it was before. And what are those unpleasant truths that I think we have to ask ourselves and we have to negotiate? I don't know if you can tell what I did here, but I switched the words. I think we have to line up for those unpleasant truths. And I think we have to let go of some of those comforting lies. So I hope you have a great conference. And again, I appreciate so much having the opportunity to speak to you this morning. Hopefully you feel challenged, but I also hope that you feel inspired, because you are living and teaching in the most amazing time ever to be a learner. Please take advantage of that with your kids. Create places of joy, places where kids want to learn more and do great things in the world. Thank you very much.